In 2012, a photo spread across the internet like wildfire. A man stood naked, eyes glazed, handcuffed. This wasn't just any criminal. This was Randy Travis, the voice many believed had saved country music from extinction. The same man who had filled stadiums, won 7 Grammy Awards, and sent 22 songs to #1 was suddenly reduced to a national punchline. Yet even that humiliation would not be the worst chapter of his story. In July 2013, he suffered a devastating stroke so severe that doctors warned he might never walk again, never speak clearly again, and almost certainly never sing again. The voice that had defined a generation was silenced in a single night. To understand the fall and the fight that followed, you have to return to the beginning. Randy Bruce Trawick was born on May 4, 1959, in Marshville, North Carolina, a farming town small enough to be overlooked on most maps. Poverty there was not temporary, it was inherited. His father, Harold, worked construction when he could find it, but alcohol and violence were constant companions in the home. Randy would later recall the sound of a belt coming off when his father drank. Love and pain arrived in the same fist. Yet amid the chaos there was music. Harold could play guitar, and on sober evenings he would sit on the porch picking melodies that drifted into the night. Young Randy watched, absorbing every chord. By 8 he was strumming himself. By 10 he was performing at local talent shows, his baritone already startling in its depth. Music became escape, but escape did not stop rebellion. By 12 he was skipping school, stealing cars, breaking into stores. By 14 he had been arrested multiple times. By 16 he dropped out entirely. Judges warned him he was headed for prison. Then in 1975 he walked into a Charlotte nightclub called Country City, USA. It's owned by Lib Hatcher, 11 years older and sharp enough to recognize raw talent when she heard it. When Randy sang, she froze. Within seconds she believed he was the real thing. She became his manager, and eventually his partner, despite scandal and gossip. She divorced her husband, invested her savings, and pushed him toward Nashville while he worked in her club washing dishes and singing nightly to distracted crowds. In 1982, they sold everything and moved to Nashville with $5,000 and a dream. The industry rejected him repeatedly. His voice was considered too traditional at a time when slick pop country ruled radio. For 2 years he struggled through odd jobs and dive performances. Then a small breakthrough came when a producer at Warner Brothers heard his demo and offered a development deal. His first single barely charted, but, on the other hand, eventually climbed to #1 after a re-release. In 1986, his debut album, Storms of Life, exploded, selling millions and producing 4 #1 singles. Suddenly, the kid from Marshville stood on the Grand Ole Opry stage, restoring traditional country's prominence. Through the late 1980s and early 1990s, album after album went platinum, earned Grammy Awards, CMA honors, and became the benchmark for authenticity. Artists like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson cited him as foundational to their own careers, yet fame could not erase childhood scars. The pressure to remain perfect mounted. Touring schedules were relentless. The drinking that once seemed casual grew habitual. By the mid-1990s, as country music shifted toward flashier crossover sounds, his dominance waned. The albums underperformed. Radio cooled. In 1997, he parted ways with Warner Brothers. Subsequent releases struggled to regain momentum. The slow fade from superstardom hurt more than a sudden collapse might have. He felt invisible again. His marriage to Lib, strained by decades of business entanglement and public scrutiny, fractured. They separated in 2010 without her structure. He spiraled. Arrests for driving while intoxicated followed. In 2012, police found him intoxicated and naked after a car accident in Texas. The mugshot went viral. The dignified traditionalist had become tabloid fodder, shame layered upon shame. He entered rehab and battled sobriety, but the damage to his reputation seemed irreversible. Then, just as he appeared to be clawing his way back, catastrophe struck. On July 10, 2013, he went to bed sober and hopeful. The next day, he suffered a massive stroke triggered by congestive heart failure. He was rushed to Baylor Plano, underwent emergency brain surgery, and was placed in a medically induced coma. Doctors warned that even if he survived, he might never regain speech or mobility. For days he hovered between life and death. When he awoke, he could not speak or move his right side. The neural pathways that controlled his voice were devastated, rehabilitation was brutal. He had to relearn how to swallow, how to sit upright, how to take a single step. Speech therapy reduced him to practicing simple syllables. The man who had once sung with effortless command struggled to say his own name. Depression weighed heavily. But Mary Davis, who had entered his life shortly before the stroke, refused to abandon him, became caregiver, advocate, and unwavering source of belief. Inch by inch he improved. Months later he could walk short distances with assistance. Words returned slowly, halting and slurred but real. In 2015 he married Mary in a quiet ceremony. In 2016 he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Unable to deliver a full speech, he stood tearful as tributes played. Later that year, at the CMA Awards, he stunned audiences by singing a brief line of Amazing Grace. The voice was fragile, but unmistakably his. The arena erupted, not for perfection, but for defiance. Today he lives quietly in Texas. Speech remains limited. Mobility impaired, singing only occasional and brief. Yet he endures. Royalties from classics like Forever and Ever Amen sustain him financially, but his greater legacy lies beyond charts and trophies. He redirected country music toward its roots. More importantly, he embodied resilience. From poverty and abuse to superstardom, from scandal to stroke, his life has traced both glory and ruin. What remains is a man who survived what should have destroyed him. Randy Travis may never sing as he once did, but his endurance speaks louder than any flawless note. His story is not merely one of rise and fall, but of refusal to let shame define him, refusal to let a stroke silence him, refusal to let the final word be defeat. In the years since that unforgettable night when he sang Amazing Grace, life has moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. Recovery did not end with applause. It continued in living rooms and therapy sessions, in small repetitions no camera recorded. Each morning still begins with exercises to keep his muscles from tightening, to preserve the mobility he fought so hard to regain. Walking requires focus. Speaking requires effort. Fatigue comes quickly, yet he persists, because persistence has become the quiet rhythm of his days. There are moments when the past feels close enough to touch. Old recordings drift through the house, and he listens not with bitterness, but with a kind of solemn recognition. That voice was his, and in some ways it still is. Though damaged, though altered, it carries the same spirit. On good days he hums along, a soft echo of what once filled arenas. On difficult days he sits silently, letting memory do the singing. He has learned to measure victories differently now, not in chart positions or awards, but in steps taken without assistance, in sentences completed without frustration, in evenings spent peacefully watching the Texas sky darken into stars. The stage lights have been replaced by porch lights. The roar of crowds has been replaced by wind moving across open land. In that quiet, there is something he never had at the height of fame-stillness. He understands now that the climb to the top and the fall from it were chapters, not definitions. The arrests, the shame, the viral photograph that once seemed to erase everything, those moments no longer stand alone. They are part of a larger narrative that includes survival, forgiveness, and grace. He cannot undo them, but he no longer lets them speak louder than the years of music that came before or the resilience that followed. People still approach him with tears in their eyes, thanking him for songs that marked weddings, funerals, and turning points in their lives. Though words sometimes fail him, gratitude shows clearly in his expression. He nods, he squeezes a hand. Sometimes that is enough. The connection remains even when language does not. Country music continues to evolve, blending styles, chasing trends. New stars rise. New voices dominate playlists. Yet his influence threads through it all. The commitment to storytelling, the return to traditional roots, the reverence for honest emotion, those elements bear his imprint. Younger artists may never fully grasp how radical his traditionalism once seemed, how it steadied a genre drifting toward pop gloss. But the foundation he helped rebuild still holds. He has also made peace with mortality. After surviving a stroke that should have ended his life, each additional year feels borrowed and sacred. He takes his medications, attends his appointments, follows doctor's instructions with the discipline of someone who understands fragility. There is no illusion of invincibility anymore. Only gratitude for mornings that arrive. When asked through Mary what he believes his life ultimately means, the answer is simple. It is not about trophies or sales. It is about getting back up. About choosing to fight when surrender would be easier. About allowing grace to meet you at your lowest point and carrying that grace forward, even in a weakened body. The man who once saved country music now lives as a quieter testament. His life has become a different kind of song, one without perfect pitch or soaring high notes, but rich with endurance. Tells anyone who listens that collapse does not have to be the final chapter, that dignity can be rebuilt. That identity can survive even when the gift that defined it is altered forever. He may never again command a stage the way he once did. But the silence that followed his stroke was not an ending, it was a pause. And in that pause, something deeper than fame took root, resilience that outlasts applause. You voiced that defined. A generation may be softer now, fractured by time and tragedy, but the spirit behind it remains unbroken. And in that unbroken spirit lies the truest legacy of Randy Trevisa life that proves even when the music fades, the meaning can endure. There is a different kind of strength that comes after the spotlight fades. It is quieter, less celebrated, but often harder one. For Randy's strength now is measured in patience. It is accepting that some days will feel heavier than others. It is understanding that recovery is not a straight line but a series of small advances and occasional setbacks. It is choosing gratitude over frustration when his body refuses to cooperate. He no longer chases applause. He chases steadiness. The routine that once might have seemed ordinary morning coffee, therapy exercises, a slow walk across the ranch has become sacred. The land in Texas stretches wide and open, and in that openness he has found something resembling peace. There are no flashing cameras there, no expectations to meet, just sky, wind, and time. Time has softened many of the sharp edges of his past. The anger that once fueled his rebellion has cooled. Shame that once felt unbearable has lost its sting. Perspective does that. You survive what should have ended you. The hierarchy of what matters rearranges itself. Ego falls away. Image becomes irrelevant. What remains is simpler. Love, breath, another sunrise. He understands that people still see him as a symbol. To some, he represents the golden era of traditional country music. To others, he represents Kushona, a reminder of how quickly success can unravel. To many, he represents hope. The footage of him singing those fragile lines of amazing grace continues to circulate, shared by people who see in it proof that the human spirit can outlast physical ruin. He didn't just sing a hymn that night, he embodied it. There are moments, of course, when grief resurfaces, grief for the voice that once carried so effortlessly, grief for conversations that are now harder to have, grief for the career that ended not with a farewell tour but with an ambulance siren. Loss does not vanish simply because survival followed. It lingers in quiet corners. Grief and gratitude can coexist. He has learned to hold both. He has also learned that legacy is not something you control. It is something others carry forward. Songs remain, on the other hand, digging up bones forever and ever, amen. They play at weddings, in honky-tonks on long highway drives. His recordings are time capsules, preserving a voice that once seemed indestructible. New listeners discover him every year, sometimes unaware of the trials that followed his peak. They hear purity, they hear conviction, they hear truth, and perhaps that is the most fitting ending or continuation to his story. Not a dramatic finale, but a steady persistence. A man who once stood at the center of a genre now stands at the center of his own hard-earned stillness. The ambition that once drove him across state lines and onto grand stages has been replaced by appreciation for the present moment. If you were to sit with him on that porch in Texas, you might notice the pauses in his speech, the careful way he forms each word. You might see the cane resting beside him. You might hear only a faint hum where a booming baritone once lived. But you would also see something unshaken in his eyes. Resolve, awareness, a quiet understanding that life does not have to be loud to be meaningful. The world often measures success by ascent, how high you climb, how long you stay there. His life suggests a different measure, how you endure when you fall. How you respond when the very thing that defined you is taken away. How you keep showing up day after day even when the crowd has gone home. Randy Travis once sang about forever. And ever he could not have known how differently those words would echo decades later. Forever is not fame. It is not chart dominance. It is not even a flawless voice. Forever is the impact left behind, the resilience witnessed, the grace extended and received. He may speak softly now. He may walk slowly. But his story continues to resonate, not because it is perfect, but because it is profoundly human. Sometimes that is the strongest note of all. As the years stretch on, the story settles into something less dramatic, but no less powerful. There are no more tabloid headlines, no more red carpet chaos, no more frantic tours across state lines. What remains is rhythm, the steady cadence of a life rebuilt. Healing at this stage is maintenance. It is protecting what has been regained. It is guarding fragile health with discipline and humility. He understands now that strength is not loud. It does not announce itself with trophies or standing ovations. It shows up in consistency, in choosing water over whiskey, in showing up for therapy even when exhaustion whispers excuses, in allowing himself to be helped without seeing it as weakness. But that lesson may have been the hardest of all for a man who once stood alone at center stage. There is also a deeper reconciliation taking place inside him, a reckoning with the boy he once was, the angry teenager stealing cars, the young man desperate to outrun poverty and pain, the superstar terrified of losing everything he'd fought to gain. Figure in a viral mugshot, the silent patient in a hospital bed, they're all the same person. And instead of rejecting those versions of himself, he has begun to accept them as chapters that led him here. Forgiveness has become central. Forgiving his father for the violence that shaped him, forgiving Lib for the complexity of a relationship that was both salvation and strain, forgiving himself for the arrests, the drinking, the shame. That kind of forgiveness does not happen overnight. It arrives slowly, often in private reflection, often in prayer, but it frees a man in ways fame never could. Occasionally, visitors come to the ranch, fellow artists, old friends, younger musicians who grew up studying his records. They sit with him, speak gently, wait patiently for responses. There's no rush. They don't come for performance, they come for presence. And that presence carries weight. To sit beside someone who has walked through glory and devastation and is still standing even unsteadily is to witness something rare. He has become, in a quiet way, a mentor without lectures. His life speaks where his voice cannot fully. To artists chasing stardom, his journey offers caution and courage at once. Success can be fleeting. Health can vanish overnight. Public adoration can turn into public judgment in hours. But resilience can outlast all of it. Character is revealed not in ascent, but in aftermath, in moments of reflection. He may not dwell on what might have been the tours cut short, the albums never recorded, the songs still unwritten. Regret, he has learned, is a heavy companion. Instead, he focuses on what still is, breath in his lungs, a wife who refused to leave, music that continues to play long after he stepped away from the microphone, a legacy that cannot be erased by one photograph or one catastrophic night. There is something poetic about the way his life mirrors the themes of the songs he once sang. Redemption, his heartbreak, faith, endurance. Those weren't just lyrics anymore. They became lived experience. When he sang about grace, he didn't yet know how deeply he would need it. When he sang about forever, he couldn't foresee how survival itself would become the promise now. In the quiet of evening, as sunlight fades over the Texas fields, he sometimes hums softly, just a line, just a fragment. The notes may waver, the pitch may not be perfect, but the intention is there. The soul behind the sound remains unchanged. Perhaps that is the truest measure of a life in music, not the perfection of the instrument, but the authenticity of the heart behind it. The world may remember him as a country legend, a cautionary tale, a miracle survivor. But at the center of it all stands a man who refused to let silence be the end of his story. A man who learned that identity is not confined to talent, that dignity can be reclaimed, that grace can meet you in the wreckage and help you stand again. He once filled arenas with a voice that seemed eternal. Today, he fills a quieter space with perseverance, humility, and hard-won peace. And in that quiet space the song continues. Not as it once was, but as it is now, steady, enduring, and profoundly human.